Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're cutting straight through the noise to look at the brutal realities of the bodybuilding industry. We're going to tear down that gym floor Broscience, marvel at some absolute genetic freaks of nature, and take a hard, unfiltered look at the ultimate price of physical perfection. All right, let's dive right in.
There's really no better place to start than that feeling that hooks literally every single lifter. Arnold Schwarzenegger famously said, "I'm getting the feeling of coming in the gym, I'm getting the feeling of coming at home." It perfectly captures that hypnotic, almost addictive allure of the pump. You know the feeling, right? You finish a set, your sleeves are tight, you feel absolutely massive. But here are the brass tacks. The pump causes zero permanent structural change to your muscle. None. It's literally just a temporary increase in blood flow and fluid that vanishes in a few hours. That feeling, it isn't the measurement of growth. The actual adaptation is.
Chapter 1. Science over Broscience. Look, it's trying to dismantle those locker room rumors you've been hearing for years with some cold, hard sports science.
Take the infamous 30-minute anabolic window. You know the exact drill. Guys frantically choking down warm protein powder in the parking lot, absolutely terrified their whole workout is going to go to waste. But real science tells us a completely different story. The muscle-building process actually continues for up to 48 hours after you leave the gym. What really drives your growth is your total daily protein intake, not some frantic post-workout chug. So, save yourself the stress.
Now let's talk about the reality of fat loss. Listen, spot reduction is an absolute myth. Fat loss is driven entirely by genetics, hormones, and being in a total caloric deficit. I'm just going to give it to you straight. The fat cell sitting right above your abs has absolutely no special relationship with the muscle underneath it. They are completely independent systems. You could do 1,000 crunches every single day for a year, and that belly fat, it won't even know you exist.
And speaking of things that hold you back in the gym, 50. That is a percentage by which progressive resistance training actually reduces sports injuries. I mean, you've probably had some guy tell you that heavy barbells are going to break you. Well, the science says the exact opposite. Proper strength training reinforces joint stability, it builds up your connective tissue. The heavy weight doesn't hurt you. Ego hurts you. Ego lifting with terrible form is what causes injuries, definitely not the barbell itself.
But what happens when you do everything right? When your science, your training, and your diet are perfectly dialed in? Well, that brings us to biological destiny. It's about playing the hand you're dealt. Chapter 2, the genetic lottery. Let's talk about muscle insertions. This is the exact point where a muscle attaches to the bone, permanently writing the genetic blueprint for a muscle's shape, its length, and its overall visual potential. You see, effort has a biological ceiling. The iconic silhouette of every famous bodybuilder was permanently decided way before they ever picked up a weight. Your genetics draw the blueprint, the gym just fills it in. Just look at the contrast between two of the most legendary arm shapes in history. A high insertion, like Arnold's, creates this dramatic, mountain-like peak when flexed. But a low insertion, like Flex Lewis's, gives you massive fullness and length with a softer, flatter peak. Neither one is wrong, right? But genetics alone dictate who gets the winning lottery ticket for that sharp, iconic silhouette that literally makes a crowd stop breathing. Even the undisputed kings of the sport are totally bound by their DNA. 4. Ronnie Coleman, who arguably had the most developed physique in the entire history of the sport, only had a 4-pack. Why? Because the number of blocks on your stomach is dictated by the tendinous intersections running across your abs. It's written directly into your DNA. It literally has nothing to do with your body fat percentage or how many reps you grind out on the mat. And then we have to talk about the cruelest insertion in all of bodybuilding, the calves. A low calf insertion naturally fills the space all the way down to the ankle, but a high insertion, that leaves a permanent gap. I hate to deliver the hard truth here, but if your genetics place that insertion high, there is a visible gap that literally no amount of heavy calf raises will ever close. A muscle belly just cannot fill empty space. It is what it is. So, okay, we've established the biological ceilings for us mere mortals. But what happens when perfect genetics meet a relentless, extreme stimulus? Chapter 3, Rise of the Mass Monsters. We are profiling the absolute freaks of nature who push the human body way past its breaking point. He didn't look like a man who had built his body. He looked like a creature that had arrived that way. That quote just perfectly captures the sheer disbelief of seeing Ronnie Coleman in his prime. When you saw him, your brain couldn't even fully process what it was looking at. He was an athlete whose biology seemed to literally mutate under the exact same stimulus that would completely destroy normal men.
296. That is how many pounds Ronnie weighed stepping onto the Olympia stage, completely shredded. Just let that terrifying scale sink into your mind for a second. Almost 300 pounds of pure, separated muscle. He wasn't just a bodybuilder. The guy was a biological anomaly that completely broke the mold.
And you know, he wasn't the only anomaly out there. We had Dorian Yates, the man who totally redefined back size by moving insanely heavy weight in a dark, dungeon gym in Birmingham. Jay Cutler, bringing this unprecedented structural three-dimensional density to the stage. Big Ronnie, whose legs were so incredibly massive they genuinely resembled a myostatin mutation you'd find in cattle. And Marcus Rule, a guy who basically ignored every single rule of classical proportions. A man built purely for visual aggression, just to make everyone else in the room uncomfortable.
But with Ronnie, the freakiness wasn't just aesthetic. 800. That's the amount of weight, in pounds, that Ronnie squatted and deadlifted. The raw strength behind all that mass made him entirely different. He was violently strong. Nobody in history combined that volume, that density, and that level of conditioning all at the exact same time.
But pushing human anatomy past its biological breaking point, well, it carries a heavy toll. The shortcut exists, sure, but it demands payment. Chapter 4. The Ultimate Cost.
The morbid data really speaks for itself here. Dallas McCarver, dead at 26 with a heart weighing 833 grams. That's nearly 3 times the normal size. Andreas Munzer, dead at 31, his body totally failing with dozens of liver tumors. Rich Piana, who was always completely transparent about his extreme chemical protocols, dead at just 46 with a severely enlarged heart. These are just the facts, showing the terrifying anatomical toll exacted on these athletes' internal organs.
The relentless momentum of this sport is incredibly dangerous. Take the tragic timeline of Dallas McCarver. In March 2017, he collapses mid-competition, right there on stage. But instead of stopping, he's back competing just weeks later in April. By August, he's found unresponsive and his chemically overloaded heart completely fails. The sport simply ignores glaring medical warning signs until it's entirely too late.
But the physical cost? That's really only half the story. The sport doesn't just destroy bodies. It literally erases legacies. The politics can be utterly ruthless. Bob Paris was considered aesthetically perfect, but when he publicly came out as gay in 1989, sponsorships vanished overnight, and the sport quietly erased him. Sean Roden won the Olympia at 43, was charged with sexual assault, instantly banned from defending his title, and sadly died of a heart attack at 46 before ever seeing a courtroom or being convicted of a crime.
Which leads us to one of the most heartbreaking contrasts in the sport's entire history. Flex Wheeler. At his absolute pinnacle, he had a physique so undeniably complete that Ronnie Coleman hailed him as the greatest bodybuilder he'd ever seen. But then comes the price: degenerative kidney disease, a transplant, and ultimately a right leg amputation at just 54 years old due to circulatory damage. The very bodies built specifically to dominate the stage ultimately turn on their creators.
We've explored the genetic lotteries, the awe-inspiring heights of those mass monsters, and the devastatingly dark costs hidden behind the curtain. It's a sport of absolute extremes, where perfection comes with a massively heavy price tag. Which leaves us with one final question for you. The shortcut exists, but so does the long road. So, which will you choose? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Until next time,